Well, hello all. This is Lonis. I'm here at OutBack, and I'm starting a webinar. I hope you all can hear me. I've had the mic live, so you've probably heard me rustling around here. I'm pretty new to webinars, so we'll just let her go. And what we have here is my optic site. I have a system up at my house, and to get onto optics, what you do is you basically go to our website, the OutBack website, and at the bottom left, scroll down, and you'll see an optics sign there and our icon there. And if you click on that, and you can make a profile and get on, and you can make your own optics site out of your Mate 3. And on the Mate 3, it's basically just a Cat5 internet cable connection to the to your Wi-Fi, and couple of emails and you're up and running. It's pretty painless to do, but I wanted to talk basically a little bit about this. This is an optics site, gives you monitoring, and you can see right now my system's selling. We are in the Great Northwest on a fairly cloudy day, and you can see that the top banner gives you weather fairly close to, hopefully close to where you're at. Sometimes people say this doesn't match my system at all, but we go to the closest weather station to your longitude and latitude and then use that information. So it's partially cloudy and about 13 C out, which is pretty close to what we got. So on the system, when you're setting it up, you give it information, and I just happen to have 5.7 kilowatt of solar. I'm harvesting 780 watts right now. I'm selling back to the grid and providing power to my loads. So one of the things they've done is if you hover over any of the items here, it tells you what it's doing. It says, yeah, I'm offsetting, I'm grid tied. You could come down and click on the batteries, and I can see what my 3 shunts are doing. Shunt A is the inverter. That's what's coming out. I should say batteries, but it's off the DC bus. And the other 2 shunts is, one is the Radium FM 100, which is going to be our new charge controller. I've got a beta model, and they're allowing me to do some testing on it, so I got that up and running. And that's shunt B, and shunt C is the FM Extreme. All of my systems are out, everything's outdoors. So if you click up here or hold over the charge controller, it shows you just your, what the things are basically harvesting. Right now, the Barak is, or the FM 100 is, they're pretty much in tune to each other, 1 or 2 watts off. I would say that's within an error factor. So that just kind of gives you the general flow. And what this does, it just gives you general flow. Sunshine's hitting the panels, comes down to the charge controller, goes over to the battery, the inverter yanks it out. The way we sell is, if you're grid tied, basically you tell the charge controllers to, I want you to bring it up to the absorbed voltage for the certain amount of time. And what happens, the inverter, if its charging cycle is over and completed, it starts selling right at about 52 volts. So you see 52.4 volts here, and I'm just maintaining that voltage. Whatever's coming in, I'm yanking it and selling it right out. So those are the top controls, and it just gives you, a general view up over here, currently the date, the time, everything that's going on. And if you come down a little bit further, you can see the graphing. And one of the nice things about this is you can see the hours of the day, and you can see your solar curve here. And that gets you. Now, it's kind of a cloudy day, so the max I've sold the max I've harvested so far is 1.3 kilowatts hours out of a 5.7K system. So, it's just a cloudy day. But you know what? I'm selling back to the grid, and I'm pretty happy about that. One of the things that's nice about this is the ability to see what's actually happening. I'm more of a tech application engineer type person, so the monitoring is fine for me. It should suffice to your customers and see. But what I like most of all is the command and control. I can go into almost any piece of gear that OutBack makes, make adjustments, and do things. And tell you the truth, I've been having quite a bit of fun with it on my own system. One of the things, before I go into the control aspect of it, what I'd like to do is show you a few of the features. And so if you come over, I can look at today's. I can click, go back one day, and that's what I did yesterday. That's what I did the day before. Looks like there's a little gap right here. So it tells you the load, you know, how much you produced, how much you harvested, sold back to the grid, and what went to the loads. So, you know, fairly copacetic. And you can go back throughout the days. And also, let's go back to today. You can also choose, I want to look at the 3 days. So if you look at the 3 days, you can get your 3-day graph. You can see today wasn't very good, yesterday wasn't very good, but the following day, that was a pretty darn good solar day. So we could go and look. I did something, and I'll explore it in a little bit, but I'm going to go back to, oh, and by the way, you can go up to the week, the month, the year, and 5 years and get data over time. So, okay, let's go back to the day of, and let's go back to today. And this is a troubleshooting thing, and I'm pretty certain I talked about this on the last one, but if you didn't see it, what's nice is this is the summary, but I can come down to my charge controllers, and this is really where you can start, you know, doing some troubleshooting. If you hear, this is what's collected from all my charge controllers. So I can click on this, and I can look at my 2 charge controllers. This one is the Baracus, or the FM100, and this is the Extreme, and you can monitor them throughout the day, and they're fairly consistent. Some has, you know, a little bit less on this one, a little more on this one. At this time of year, I do have some shading, and they play across my panels in a vertical manner, so I may lose 3 panels, 6 panels, 3 panels. This is 6 and 3 all over again, depending on, you know, the time of day. So that's kind of interesting to note. But if you've got a uniform solar day and you see one of your yields is drastically down, well, just from viewing this, you say, you know, maybe we should go out and check all the strings. Maybe one of the panels is getting soily, especially if it's consistently lower than the other one. I happen to have a 5.7K split exactly even, same configuration, side by side, so they should produce pretty much the same. And, you know, you can see a few variations here, but I could explain that by probably some solar shading as the day goes through. But, you know, still interesting to look at. So that's that. You can come down, click on the battery, and you can see the net battery, and you can go to all of the shunts and separate out what I sold and what comes in from the 2. So one is the inverter taking, the other one is the 2 charge controllers. So, you know, you can see these things, and that's kind of nice. Let's go back over to summary. And on this is where it starts getting fairly valuable too, is I don't know if you can see that icon or not, but here is, right now I'm looking at the state of charge, and if you hover over these dots, it gives you 100% or whatever your state of charge is at the time. And because I'm selling back to the grid, I maintain about 100% state of charge all the time. So I can come over here, click on voltage, and you can check your voltages out throughout the evening and check and see. This is pretty darn nice. There's also temperature in Celsius and temperature in Fahrenheit. So you can see my temperature is fairly consistent, about 42 degrees F, and probably against all that is proper and right, my batteries are in a battery box outside. They're flooded lead acid. I have the Extreme and the FM100, which are outdoor rated charge controllers, so I have them out hanging underneath my array along with the batteries. And I'm kind of curious, you know, batteries out in the cold. Here in Washington, especially where we're at, it may freeze from time to time, but somehow I'm not too worried about freezing my batteries. Generally, I have power pretty consistently, and I have low loads, so I don't expect too much of an issue, but, you know, we can see over time. So that's sort of this front screen, and you can just go back and see what you've done, and, you know, come over to charge controllers and check the yield, check and see what each thing's doing, and it gives you, you know, a pretty good view. So there's a lot here that you may not see from the start. So on this, let's go up to this little cog right here. And if you click on this, this is the easy key, I guess it's called. And what we have here is if I want to turn the inverter on or off, I can do that, or I can put it into search, and this will actually send out a command to my inverter, and I can either turn the inverter on or off. And what this does is it turns off the inverter function. So the generator, I can, if it's hooked up to automatic gen start, I can instigate a volt charge or an EQ charge. This is, again, just things I can do. There's a if I ever want to go through a complete charge of my batteries, and it doesn't hurt them to do that. It's if you're just selling back to the grid, my batteries are basically floating at about 52 volts almost constantly. So from time to time, to throw a charge at them is not a bad thing. So, and I can drop the grid or use it, depending on what I want, So there's things you can do from here for reasons that vary from installation to installation. So when I make a change, if you come down and hit apply, it's going to send out to your gear, and it will do that. So that's command and control is pretty nice. So here's some of the other things, and this turns into a sales feature. You've got a system, it's remote, weather's lousy, or you just don't feel like driving there, and you have someone walks into your shop and says, yeah, I'm thinking about putting in an inverter system, and what can you tell me? You could go to a site you have, you could show them how it works, you could click on the photos, and if you click on and say view photos, boom, up comes, this is my system at my house. I have since removed the dirt panel, but that was it. So let's see what else. And here is, I live on an island, so this is how I got the panels to my house. And this is my inverter in a battery box outside, and that's underneath my array. So that's, again, I made this myself. And I tell you what, I've really learned to admire good installers, because I talk about it, I don't really install, and man, did I go through a learning curve in trying to install my own system. And this is my truck, cleverly disguised as a Hyundai Accent with 20-foot poles that I did not get a ticket doing this, so that's good. So that was some of the, I mean, if this was your site, you would probably want to have a little bit better pictures. Oh yeah, might as well look at this one too. Let's see here. This is me after a successful, I'm looking pretty cocky there. It doesn't always happen though. So at any rate, so let's go back, and you can put notes in, just system notes. Hey, the batteries are this. I mean, after a while you can forget things, so you could leave notes in there. You can go to an alert page here, and you can have alerts sent to you by your email. And this is actually crazy, because if you look at this, let's see, where's the slider? Here it is. If you look at this, you could have all those error messages emailed to you, all the warning messages emailed to you, and you could do this immediately, hourly, daily, or never. So if you're having trouble with one of your coworkers, I would put their name down here, add them as someone, and then highlight all these and have them send immediately. And see how much they like you when you're done. At any rate, so the devices is just, a list of all the devices. I've got a GS8048A, the FM100, the FMR Extreme 80, FlexNet DC, and the Mate 3. And this just tells you, the serial numbers, the rev, the firmware number. A battery is my standard flooded, and it just, just information about the system. So that's that. There's something that's fairly new here, and well, this isn't it, but let's just to continue. My site is on Hat Island. It's it's my home, latitude and longitude, and a lot of people may not want all that information. So you don't necessarily have to put it in. And these are the people that I've invited for full control on my system. These are people I work with, and when we demonstrate as we train around, you know, if John Weber wants to do a couple things to my system, well, you know, so be it. You know, they're fairly intelligent people. Well, most of them are at any rate. And so I gave them full control, but you can give limited control to certain people. You can give zero control to people. And say you've got a coworker and you trust and you don't want to have to deal with this your own, you could invite people in and give them full control. So that's a nice feature. So here's the other thing. This just came up. I just found out about this. If you click on reports, you can generate a report based on your date, start date, end date, and 15-minute increments. And if you hit email, I did one this morning just to show you. So what I did is yesterday, a full day from start date is in the morning till the end date that evening. And I've got, in about 2 minutes, I got this report. Let's see, I believe it's this one. Yeah, this is the aggregation report. And really, this is 1 day of my system. And this is just the SOC information, state of charge. And because I'm selling back to the grid, it just doesn't do much. It's just 100 or 99 because I'm selling back to the grid. But you can come down, click on the battery voltage and see what the battery does. You can go click on the load, see what the load does. You can go to the grid, see what kilowatt hours came in from the grid. To grid, from grid, solar. And this is in the morning, so I didn't sell anything. So let's see. Let's see. To the grid. Let's grab the slider, come down, and this is at 0 hour yesterday morning, so long about 9:45. I'm starting to sell. Where is this here? 2017. Doesn't look like much went on yesterday. There's just, yeah, we had a terrible solar day, so this isn't reporting very much. From the grid, you can do that. The solar, what was produced, let's go look and see. Again, just not much going on yesterday. It was a lousy day. So shunt A from the battery, and there's all these, shunt A from the battery shunt B, and you can go to these various settings and just get information. So that's one report. And let's shut this down. And the other report is the event log. So you can see, where was this? I did something yesterday. I'm messing with my batteries a bit, and I wanted to do something. So at some point yesterday, where was that? Yeah, I changed the rebulk, the refloat, and the rebulk voltages. And I'm looking at my batteries, wondering why something's going on, and I just wanted some information. So this is where they were changed. And you know what's interesting? It says that I did it. So when somebody emails in and makes a change to the system, it's recorded. So you can see that I did this, and Roy Dan looks like he got onto my system. Fine, he's got access. He's a neighbor. I trust him, work with him. So, this just gives you a list. If things are changing on site, you'll see it. If things are changed by me or somebody else and they have access, you'll see it. So again, just some information. So that's all these buttons and reasons for them up here. A lot of it's just sales. Hey, I put up a beautiful system. It's 2 hours away. Why don't I show you, my customer? We can sit down and have a cup of coffee. I can talk to you about it. And that's also one of the nice things about this too. When you have several systems, I mean, first thing you can do in the morning, gee, what is going on with these systems? If you're worried about it, you can get up, log into optics, and check all of your systems out and say, everything's just fine. I don't see any issues, so I'm going to go on about my day. And the nice thing is if you do see something, say somebody lost power and they're very close to having their batteries down, if you don't have automatic gen start set up, you could just simply tell your generator to start running and start a generator. So, hey, my batteries are low, looks like a lousy solar day, or it's before the sun. Why don't I go ahead and start my gen running? I did something kind of interesting on my system. Let's go over to device map, and this is where I can talk to each and every device. And what I did is I hooked up a relay to my Radian, and where my home is on a small island, and I have a slow sailboat, so I tend to stay here all week, and then I go home on the weekends. Well, I've got a great garden, and when it's summer here, I'm not there to water. So what I did is I hooked up my well pump. I have a cistern that collects rainwater, and I hooked up a pump to it, and I, connected it to the Radian via a relay to turn on the power on and off, and now I can water my garden from anywhere in the world. And that's pretty cool. I do a lot of training and traveling around the world, so if I'm in Africa and it's hot summer, I could, water for 15 minutes a day, or just do it for, an hour at one point in Wednesday. I'm coming back Friday, I can water again. But this doesn't have to be water. This could be anything, any AC load connected either to the grid or to the Radian could be activated from this relay. And what I did is I just went to aux control, and if I come over here and I say on and click it and come down to apply, it tells the aux, I want you to go active high. And what happens is that relay says, okay, I'm going to connect the AC power cord up, and suddenly my little pump has AC voltage, and I start watering. I don't need to water now because it's going to rain here for the next millennium, it's going to feel like. So what I'll probably do is hook up a small heater. And what will happen is now, if I want to, run a load just to demonstrate something, I can say, yeah, I just started the heater up in my house, and, I've got the heat at a minimum. So maybe an hour before I go home, I could turn this heater on and just knock a little bit of extra heat in it. I keep my heat on at the bare minimum, just enough to keep the house warm. And so, these are just some things you can do. We also have the relay that you could do the same thing. I have a relay hooked up. I want to do something, and this something that you're doing could be really anything. Turn on some cameras. It just depends on what you're trying to do. So that's kind of, command and control aspect of this. And let's say you installed something and said, geez, I forgot the battery specs. They're at home. Well, when you get home, you could come in here and hook up your absorb time to what you want, your voltages, and you can make all these changes and just hit apply. And then suddenly it will write to your gear and make those changes. So it's awfully nice for controlling things. So say just for various things, I want to go in there and make some changes for some reasons. So, what reasons are really up to you in the system. We're about halfway through with this, so I'm going to go from looking at this to a PowerPoint, and just to show you some of what can be done with this is, if this is my system, you can see it's 5.7 kilowatts. At the time I had done 28.9. This must have been in the summer or early spring, because I had a pretty good solar day. And this is a beautiful solar curve. Hey, it's 7, 8 in the morning. I started, went all the way to 7 or 8 at night, and it just happens to be, where's the date? Yeah, it looks like May 5th. So pretty good solar day. You can see I had SOC selected over here, so I stayed at 100% basically the entire day. Okay, so if we come down and look at voltage, you can see where the voltage dropped a little bit. As soon as the sun starts coming up, you can see it come up to about 52 volts, and I maintain that voltage all day long until the sun goes down, and then I've got a full battery. Okay, so that's my system selling in May. So here's what can happen. And this is an actual customer site. He has 2.3K of solar. This is in Hawaii. And what the installer did is he called me up and said, hey, Lonis, would you mind looking at my site and seeing if there's something we could do to make it better or to make changes? Optics is new. How do all the modes work? A lot of questions here. We have 7 different modes of operation in the inverter. So which one works right for you and why? And it really depends on your situation, what the job at hand is, the task you're trying to make it do. Now, being Hawaii, he couldn't sell back to the grid, so that immediately leaves us with two modes, mini grid or grid zero. And so he put it into grid zero, and you can see that he's got about 0.2 kilowatt hours. And you know what? This, in my house, I have the same thing. About 200. That's my refrigerator and my freezer turning on and off all day long. I'm gone. There's no one in the house. I turn everything off. I have my refrigerator and freezer backed up. So I know what that looks like. And that's exactly what he has here. And with grid zero, you could see in the morning, sun came up, we went through a charge, batteries went up to basically 100%, maintained them all day long, used a little bit of solar here when the loads increased, but really we only harvested about 1.1 kilowatt hour. So, and what this was is, let me go back here, 5 kilowatt load during the day, or the entire day. From the grid was 4.8, 1.1 from solar. Not a great yield. And we're looking at this, and Roy and I, and wondering about it, and Jorge came up, Jorge Guzman, the head of the service department, he says, well, look, this was why. In grid zero, we have to allow 1 AC amp to come through from the grid. The idea is to reduce it as much as possible, but we have to allow 1 AC because the part of grid zero, the two caveats is I cannot use the grid to charge. So if you're in grid zero, the grid cannot be, there's nothing you can do in grid zero to make that inverter except the grid as a charging source. That's one caveat. The other one is it will, it has to let 1 AC amp through. So when you have basically a low load like this, it says, well, the grid has to service this load. So you could see when the load increased a little bit, well, the sun come up, we went through a quick charge cycle, went up to 100%, and barely used the batteries all day long. So we're looking at that, and we thought, well, why don't we put it into grid zero? And this is where optics really comes in, because you could make some changes. You know what it was. You can make the graphs, you can save the screens, and you can look at this and go, this is what I did in grid zero. I'm going to go to mini grid and see how well that works. So that's what we did. The guy gave us permission, and we went in, we changed it to mini grid, and right away we went up to 6.3 kilowatts of solar, zero from the grid with the same load. It's the same system 1 day later after making this change. And the reason is now in mini grid, what it says, as long as my batteries are above a certain voltage, and you can choose the voltage, and it's variable from 44 volts all the way up to the absorbed set point. So I think it's what, from 44 to 59 or 64 volts. You can make that change. So what we did is we said, I want you to use the batteries down to a low level. And then what would happen is you would see all night long, he's off the grid, we're running these loads, you can see the state of charge drop down, sun comes up, this thing starts charging, and you can see a nice curve here from the solar curve. We achieve approximately 100% somewhere in here. And so we charge it up, the batteries stop taking solar, but we still produce enough to not only run the loads, but throw a little bit into the batteries, and by mid-afternoon, he's at 100%. So cool. So he stayed off the grid the entire day, and we harvested 6.3 of solar, and the one before, 1.1. So if you didn't have optics, how would you know what you've done? This gives you and your customer a huge visual, and I'm a big proponent of just making small changes. So this is, what we did. So here's 3 days in mini grid, and you could monitor this and go, well, look, yeah, I come down to this value. And the nice thing is you could look at the state of charge, better yet, look at the voltage. How low am I going? And he's fairly consistent. This one's a little bit higher, this was a little bit lower, this is a little bit higher on the state of charge. And he comes up to 100%, coast all night long, comes up to 100%, coast all night long, comes up to about 100%. In 3 days, he did 17.8 kilowatt hours, and the load was 11.2. So In 3 days on grid 0, he only used 3.9 kilowatt hours, or created 3.9, because the loads are so small, we have to honor that 1 AC amp, so we simply cannot work well in mini grid or a grid 0 with low loads. That's one of the caveats. So with this, you can prove it. I mean, how do you know? It's really nice to be able to look through and say, this is what's happening. So that's what's nice about this. Make the changes, make small changes. I'm a big proponent of just small changes a little at a time and narrow it down. So, people hear me say, well, grid 0 doesn't work in that situation, but it can work just great in other situations. So here's a little bit larger system, 9.4 kilowatts. He's got 34 kilowatts of solar on here. The load was 73K. Substantially larger load, and grid 0 works just great. You can see it charging up. It goes up to almost 6K, and then there's your solar curve, pretty nice, and the batteries take over at night and help along with the grid. So we're actually blending battery power with the grid to run the loads. So you can see the loads up here, the grid's down here, and we contributed some from solar, and we did so throughout the entire evening. And it works great. So in this, with a load of 73 kilowatt hours a day, how big of a battery bank would you have to do this? So this is the case where mini grid would probably be a terrible mode for this. You would need large batteries, big battery bank, who knows? I mean, you'd have to sit and pencil it out. But nonetheless, it's kind of nice to watch this. So that comes up to, a few things that can happen. So in this one here, this is mini grid, and you can see right about here he went back to the grid. And it was interesting because what I noticed is if you look over time, he was coming home at night. I think it was getting warmer, and I think he turned on a fan right in here. A little bit larger loads than the rest of the day. Come home, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, turned on a fan, 7 o'clock, and by 9 o'clock, we hit a low value of 43 volts, and we went back to the grid. That's not a crime. He ran all day long and didn't go back to the grid until his loads were at a very low area, 10 o'clock at night. He's probably heading to bed, and hey, I'll let the grid run my low loads at night. So this is just nice to see, and this is where you start getting interesting, because we can tell it to use down to 44 volts. And again, I was in Hawaii, and they said, well, I have Aqueon batteries, and I can go way lower. And with the lithium batteries, you can go far below 44. So it's not only 44 volts, it's 44 volts over time. And it took me a while to realize this, that you can say, yeah, I take my batteries down to 44 volts for 3 minutes and then go back to the grid. All right, or I could say, geez, I've got a battery that can really be depleted. I'm going to go to 44 volts for a half an hour. And then I can watch this and say, in a half an hour, I still have more battery that I want to use. I'm going to kick it up to, 45 minutes. An hour. How long does this customer go? And you can really quantify how far down you can go by that time value. So here's where some of the danger lies. Well, excuse me. We have these set-offs, these set points in our inverter. High battery cutout means if I get up to 68 volts on my 48 volt system, shut the inverter down. There's something going on here. It just, bam, that's where we shut down. But the equalize can be adjusted from 40 to 68 volts. I believe the default is about 58. The absorbed value is 57.6 AGM type batteries, but you can adjust from 4464, 4464 for float. Refloat is at 50 and 48 volts for rebulk. And these are just the default settings. Here is where you have to be careful. Low battery cutout. If my inverter goes down to 42 volts, stop inverting. So this is where optics really helps too. I've got a low battery set up to sell down to 44 or use mini grid down to 44 volts. But what happens is if I tell my system to go to 44 volts and then suddenly I lose power. It's in the middle of the night. I've got very low batteries, and I got to run for an undetermined amount of time. So this is where you got to be careful. I mean, you could drop the low battery cutout down as low as 36, but there's not a whole lot of energy left then. So you want to be pretty careful about this. And these setup points are all adjustable. And with optics, you can actually monitor the system and say, look, I've got it set for here. I'm going to watch this tonight and see how low I really get. Maybe I don't want to go down to 44. Personally, I don't like doing that. I like to have plenty of gas in my batteries so that if I lose power, boom, I can coast through the evening. I know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. So these are the settings that are you want to consider when you're setting up these modes. And I kind of did a little chart here. This is our charging algorithm. So and I superimposed this over it. So this is, your rebulk set point. When you hit rebulk, what it does is you have a timer, a bulk timer or an absorb timer. And if you drag your batteries down to 48 volts or whatever that is set to, could be as low as 44. What it does, it says, I want you to, when you get an AC source and you're ready to start charging, I'm going to add, for every 6 minutes at or below rebulk, I will add 6 minutes to the absorb timer. So you don't necessarily go through an entire absorb time each time you get this. You got to be down there for, the proper amount of time to recharge that timer. And the same with refloat. With refloat, when you hit it, it says, oh, if I have an hour in my float set point, I want to come up to 54.4 for 1 hour. When you hit refloat, it charges that timer all the way up instantly. If you have 1 hour in there, the timer is reset to 1 hour. So that's the difference between refloat and rebulk. Refloat says, yes, go through an entire cycle, whatever the absorb time or float time is set to, do that. Rebulk says, well, if you hit this 48 volts, the rebulk voltage for 6 minutes, I will put 6 minutes on the absorption timer. Therefore, the next charge cycle, I only have to hit my absorption point for 6 minutes. It doesn't go through an entire absorb cycle every time. So with that being said, let's see what we got next. Okay, let me get out of here and let's go look at something, because the other day I had a customer hit me with a kind of an interesting thing. And what it was a gentleman in Phoenix, and it had something to do with, I believe, the Salt River project, and this was quite a while ago. So let's come down here, and you've seen where you can use this to go from, pick a mode and see how well it works for you. See how low the batteries go, see how your customer is actually using the system, and really get in and dive in. Well, if you come up to the mate, and this is our mate 3, and you can set up AGS, AC generator, enable AGS. I've got it set up to port 2 right now. Don't ask me why I have that. Usually it's the inverter port 1. But you can come down and you can adjust the cool down time, the warm up time. Let's say it's getting cold out there and you didn't have this set. Well, I can set the warm up time, and what this does, it says start the generator, but don't hook up and use it for 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes. So it could be anywhere from 0 to 30 minutes. Give it a chance to warm up before you throw a big load at it. And conversely, if you've been running a generator for a while, sometimes they like a cool down time. So what this does is you can say, well, I want to stop using the generator, let it idle, I'm going to begin inverting, and then I'm going to let that cool down time, let my generator run for a couple minutes with no load, just to let it cool down. So these are all just things that you can do. If you have a DC generator, you could set up for a DC voltage and an absorb time for the DC generator. You can do, all these AGS things you can do. So, and here's something interesting. This is me just thinking out loud, but I have a must run here. And I could tell my generator or my well pump, hook it up to this, send that aux high, turn on my well pump, maybe 15 minutes a day, a quick 15-minute watering with a must run. It doesn't have to be a generator. It's just a relay that says, I want this load to be running. It could be a generator. You kind of got to be careful a little bit because there are fault times. If I tell my generator to run and it doesn't see a AC input, you could get, where is that? You could get an error message because the generator type, there's a fault time in here somewhere. I don't see it right now. You see fault time right here. So be aware of that here. So at any rate, this is things you can do. You know, you have the grid use timers, and there are 3 intervals a day where I could either drop the grid or use the grid. Don't use the grid at high peak values when the grid's really expensive. Hey, just drop the grid, let me invert. When that high value goes away, I want to go back and I'm going to reconnect to the grid and allow that to run. And so there's just three different grid use periods in a day. So what I wanted to get to was flex time. And this gentleman wanted to sell his batteries after the sun went down. And at first it seemed like a crazy idea, but I think the idea was here is if you were a grid provider and you wanted to say, I have all this solar being produced on my grid and I want to take that, charge a battery, and discharge it back into the system at a later hour. So here's what we ended up doing. We went into mode 1. We say, I want you to be grid tied, and I want you to start selling back to the grid at, let's say, 6 o'clock at night, which is 1800 hours. Okay, so now I'm going to sell my batteries. You could go into the grid tied parameters and say, I want you to sell my batteries down to 44 volts. The sun isn't up at that time, so you're going to have to start with a full battery of basically 50 volts, 51 volts, and I'm going to sell it down to this value. You can also go into the mate tree and tell it how much current you want to sell. So you could slowly sell back to the grid and maintain this voltage. So, all right, so now, whether you use it like this or not, the idea is just to show you some of the value. All right, so now I'm starting to sell at 6 o'clock at night. I want to stop selling at, what time? 6, say 10 plus 12, that's 2200. So at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to switch over to mini grid. Why did I switch to mini grid? Well, remember where I said with mini grid, we will not charge the batteries. The grid, if you sell your batteries down and you don't want to charge them up immediately, you want to wait until maybe the next solar day. Let the solar on the grid charge it up, let the solar in your system, whatever, charge it up. So right now at 10 o'clock at night, I switch over to mini grid and it just says, oh, I could have my battery value set so that I won't even use from the battery. I've got it high. What it says is if my battery's below this, do not take anything from the battery, just let the grid run all these loads. So basically we're in pass-through. We sell from 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock. And then at some point in the morning, I could switch to a third mode. I could go to, for some reason, I'll choose backup. And why backup? Not really certain. I don't want to sell. I just want to have these loads run. Everything's passing through. Let the solar charge this back up. Or you could charge from the grid when the solar is. So in this system, the idea was if you were a grid person, I could charge my battery during the day, sell those batteries back at night, and then wait until an opportune time to start charging. So that's how you would kind of use this. And you could do these 3 modes whatever you want. What you got to be careful about is telling them to do things that they shouldn't do. Keep in mind the low battery cutout. If I sell my batteries down to 44 volts and I've got my low battery cutout set at 42, and then, you know, I don't have much to go on if you're an end user. That's something that I would normally never do for an end user. Sell your batteries down. Our normal cell is at 52 volts, and that way you can, you know, have a full battery. And you can see that at my house. Now, I'm going to say discard all these, and I'm going to go back. Oh, would you like to? Yes, I want to discard them. So you can see on my site that, let's see, come over here, pull this down, come over here, click on volts. And, you know, basically I'm at 52 volts. I stop selling when the battery voltage drops below 52 volts. So I maintain a full battery in case I lose power. And this is just our normal programming. We sell at 52, so all day long the solar's trying to pump as much in as it can, and the inverter takes out as much as it can, and you know, it's just a copacetic system. It just kind of keeps going along, and it's interesting. So the other day, let's look at something. The other day, I'm a home brewer, and through home brewing and sticky beer being spilled, I've ruined the seals on my refrigerator. So let's look, I think it was Saturday, could have been Sunday, I changed the gasket on my freezer. And you can see that I start pretty much every hour. This is my refrigerator. It was the same guy's refrigerator in Hawaii. Every hour I have basically a 200-watt load. I've got a refrigerator, a freezer. They're probably both on here. Who knows? You know, this is just the way my system works all day long. So on Saturday, and this is Saturday, I changed it. So let's go to the next day, Sunday. Okay. So notice the gap here, but it didn't do much different. But and I was there till 1 o'clock. No, I left at 11. So you can see as soon as I left the house, loads way down. That's interesting. I don't use much in my house, but you can see my usage. I left at about 11 o'clock. There's a storm coming through, and I had a boat ride, so I hightailed it out to beat the storm, and I made it back. So here's my point, I guess, is the following day. Let's go look at this. And now this is after it's all gone back in, and I'm not there, and the loads are back down very low, you know, basically 300 kilowatt hours. These are really low because this is so high. But look, after changing that gasket, I now have large gaps where that load in the refrigerator doesn't turn on every hour like it did. Something as simple as changing a gasket in my freezer, I believe, made this difference. And that's pretty darn cool. I mean, to pick this up and see the difference is pretty amazing. So let's go to the next day and see, you know, and this is me just kind of going, I wonder if that made a difference. So this is Tuesday, and you can see less solar days, so these look big, but there's still 2-hour gaps in here where I don't get a load turn on just from changing my refrigerator. Now, this is kind of empirical. I'm not certain that's exactly what's happening, but it sure looks like it to me. And this is kind of the fun of optics, where you can make a change, and it doesn't have to be in the system. It could be on your loads, and go back and go, well, look at that. I made that change on this day, and look at the difference that made. And start quantifying these things. And you know, when you go over to a customer's house and you see, like me, my gasket was broken loose and hanging off the refrigerator, and it's been like that for years. I finally bought one and changed it, and it's just kind of funny how you can quantify things and see things from optics. So we've talked about the graphs. We've got about a little over 10 minutes left. I'm going to open this back up, and let me see. And that's our chat. You guys got any questions? I'll try to entertain them. Let's see. So far, all I see is us talk to each other. Let's see. See if I can find. Oh, here's the questions. I'm here on the webinar thing panel. Oh, dang it. I can't keep that highlighted. Okay, so let me try to get some of these questions going here. Great, thank you, loud and clear. Okay, thanks, Isaac. My SOC doesn't stay close to 100% even though I'm grid tied. The battery drains down to below 52 and then comes back up using solar and or grid to charge. What settings do I need to change? My SOC doesn't stay close to 100% even though I'm grid tied. Battery drains down until below 52, comes back up. On something like that, I would monitor and the question is, my SOC doesn't stay at close to 100% even though I am grid tied. The battery drains down until below 52, then comes back up using solar and or grid to charge. What setting do I need to change? Okay, so there's a couple things I would look at. Look at the voltage. How low does the voltage go after your solar day? Because what should happen if your batteries are healthy, they should drop down to what? I think about 50.1, 51 volts. A full battery is, just right around 50 volts. So if they drop down lower than that and you're actually on the grid is taking all of the loads. So I would look at each of your batteries, go in there and measure, see if one of them is down, see if you're, as you stop charging, if one of your batteries has a bad cell, a loose connection, all these things. This sounds like a battery issue, more so than anything else. I mean, if your batteries are dropping down, it's batteries. Is it possible to get a kilowatt graph through the day versus an energy kilowatt graph? All of ours is in kilowatts, but kilowatts, everything's in kilowatt hours. So I don't believe we have that. Although you can't get it through optics. You might be able to find it on some of those, those two reports that I saw, that I showed you. If you go over to the cog, come up to the cog and hit on this and hit report, there is additional information there. You might be able to find it there. If nothing else, you've got the SD card on the mate, and you could find that from going to the SD card, downloading that, and parsing out the CSV files. It will be there. And let's go see what else we got here. Did I see a battery at 60 volts? Yes. I have been equalizing from time to time, and keep in mind that I've got my battery absorb at 58.8. My batteries are out, so if I go through an absorb cycle, then it is going to be a little bit higher because it's battery temp compensated. I'm at 14C, I believe, so that's quite a ways from 24. And also this last week, what I was trying to do is I'm running the FM100, and I was trying to do some absorb cycles, and foolishly on Sunday, I tried to do an absorb cycle, and then I realized that there's not enough sun to maintain even absorb voltage. I tried to do an equalized cycle. So that's probably where you saw the 60. The inverter brought it up to 60, but as soon as I made just the charge controllers do it, it just dropped right down. So yeah, 60 volts. I have flooded acid batteries, so I was trying to do an equalized charge. So let's hope that gets you. Why do some changes applied via optics RE internet show the user as on-site versus the remote user that applied the change? Okay, if you make changes via the internet, it takes your name, whoever did it, and says, This was done by Lonus. Those changes that I did to the the rebulk and float, I did them from OutBack here. So if you're making changes or the system's doing things on its own, I hit my refloat level, I went to float. Well, that's an on-site message. And what can happen, and why we did that is partially is people do things. Traditionally, we have so many ability to change so much, we would constantly get customers that call up and go, hey, my inverter stopped charging, how come? And you look and you go, well, you turned the charger off. And they swear, well, I didn't do that. So we wanted to make sure that, hey, if this was done on site through the system or using the mate, we don't know who did it, but we can say it was done on site. Whereas if I do it or one of my friends that I've allowed access to it, I can see who made the change at the day, the time, the second. So I hope that answers that. What are breaks and data chart cost from? I'm not certain. You know, this is a question from Chris Dow, and you know, what are the breaks in the data cost from? I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if it's internet or mate related. I do know that I had an older mate that I ran on my system, and I had a really hard time keeping it connected. It was up, it was down, it was up, it was down. I got a brand new mate, and I can read and write to my system perfectly now. So I don't know. Sometimes, and of course, me being who I am, I find old mates that have been scrounged and sent back and thrown away, and I grab them and I use them, and sometimes, so I'm not getting I don't always get the best mates. So where I got the original one, I found it somewhere. But the new one that I got is what we're looking at here. And man, it almost works perfectly. I can read and write to my gear, but I really don't know the answer to that, Chris. Sorry. After the webinar, did you have a chance to look at the, okay, that's after the webinar. Check the float setting. Yeah, and if you're saying float setting, this is from Adam. Well, let's go look. Let's go float setting. Okay, let's see. I'm going to have to keep going. The float set point. Now, if it's the refloat, I've dropped them way down. What I've noticed is, and you can see this right here, you can see my batteries are going down to 49.1 volts. And I've got them outside, and I don't know the answer to this. This is one of the mysteries of mine, and I'm seeing them go down to 49.1. So what would happen with my refloat at basically 50 every night? As soon as I stopped selling, I would go through a float cycle, and it was driving me crazy. Like, why am I charging my batteries from the grid after selling all day long? So what I've done is I dropped those refloat and rebulk way low. I'm on the grid, so I'm not too worried about, you know, my system being set up right. Right now, what I'm doing is an experiment. I want to know how low my batteries go just sitting there with no load on them at night. And then I have to figure out why. And at this point, I don't know why. It's something that I've been meaning to do every weekend, but for some reason, every weekend, my boss calls me up and has me do things, and it's a horrible habit, you know. So I will, that's why my float settings are so crazy, but that's the answer to that. I deliberately made them crazy so I could check some other things. Is there someone I could contact to look at my optics settings, see if I set up correctly? I am not grid tied. Isaac, boy, you know, that's a rough one. Time is hard. My name is Lonus, so I hate to volunteer because sometimes crazy busy. That's all I can say is I'm crazy busy. But God, I'm going to hate myself for saying this over the website. My name is Lonus. It's LTUSS, LTUSS at OutbackPower.com. So I'm in the app engineering section. Shoot me an email, and I may have to do this on my own time, but these things are always interesting too. And just to let you know, I'm doing an SEI class, and it's sucking time out of my life at an exponential rate. Between that and a couple phone calls on the weekend, I am actually on the hairy side of going crazy. So I could try, but I won't promise. On my optics RE system, the percent that shows on the screen for state of charge never matches the voltage or the green dot on the FlexWare indicator. I am fully off grid and have no grid tie. This is where I would start looking at, and this is from Rick Dumas, and this is where I would look at your parameters. How old is your battery bank? Are all your parameters set up right? If you have a 500 amp hour battery bank and it's 5 years old, you don't have a 500 amp hour battery bank, you got something less. So this is where matching everything to your system is huge, and this is where you would almost have to go in and see what you've done. How come these things don't match? You know, this is the wonders of the FlexNet DC. It's one of those things I love to hate. I love the information I get from it, but if it's not programmed properly, then it will give you, erroneous information. One thing to do is perhaps charge your batteries up to 100%. Go through a good long charge cycle, and then if your FND says I am at 100% and your lights all match, start from there and see. But check your amp hours, check your voltage ratings, and check and see. That's all I can say. Funny. Dave, there's a guy at work here, Dave LeBeau, and I got a message that said, and it's Dave confessing. He sent that in. When connected to the grid, the load listed on optics is strictly what is being consumed on the backup load center and not the primary load center. That is correct. We only know what's on the output of our inverter. We can't tell what's on your main panel. Why does it show energy coming from the grid when I turn my generator on? I have no grid system attached at all. I'm fully off grid. On something like that, you could go in there and tell it, hey, I am on a generator. It's just the setting in the mate. I'm off the top of my head. It's going to be, you could do it on optics here. You're going to have to tell it that, hey, I'm not on the grid. I am on optics. Or excuse me, I am on a generator. And I'll go, oh, yeah, okay, well, you told me that I am grid connected, so that's where I am. And that's going to be under system. I'll tell you what, let's see if we can't find that. Let's go over to, shut this down. So let's go over, that's going to be, I think that would be either under inverter or mate. Let's go to device map. Let's go to the inverter and mode, offsetting, firmware. Nope, it's going to be under the mate. So status, number, MAC address, AGS, AC input. AC input, use AC input, charger system. Somewhere in here you can tell it I am on a generator, not the grid. I don't know where it is right off the top of my head right now. Status, general, battery voltage. I hope I'm not boring the people that didn't ask this. Battery, see. Oh, I think I got it. AC input, general, AC input priority, grid input. See, I'm grid tied. If you come over here and say, hey, I'm on generator, it'll go, oh, okay. So that AC source I see is a generator, not your grid. Pretty certain that's it. You can do this on the mate also. So I believe that's it. So for the person that asked there, why does it show gen or grid, not gen? And this is going to hurt. Christel, I have a site that is showing a solar value at 4 kilowatt hours at midnight. Is it a mate 3 issue or optics? And I see this from time to time on mine. And I'm reporting it to engineering. And the funny thing is, hey, the sun went down and I see optics showing me something from the solar, and you go, it can't be. I know it's dark there. So the other day I was at my house and I was actually just happened to be walking by my mate, and it was after the sun, and I saw the charger light was on, and I looked like, why would that be charging? And it showed solar coming from the one of my panels. Oh, let me see that. I just got an answer from one of the main brains here. Let me try to clear up my screen so I can see it. Oh, I lost it. Gosh. There's a guy that gave me an answer to that, and I don't, I pressed the wrong button and it's gone now. Skype, was it Skype David LeBeau? Let's see. Boy, I'm sorry guys, I'm kind of struggling here with this. That midnight spike is a new issue in optics since Tuesday. Okay, I've seen it, not so much at midnight spike, but I've seen mine collecting solar information, and it was actually on my mate and it was reporting to optics. So I was at my house one day and I saw it going to, from the mate and being reported also in optics. So, you know, some sort of a bug, you know, I'm sure eventually you'll find it. And David LeBeau is helping me here a lot. Thank you, David. He says the breaks in data, typically internet disconnections. So there's an answer for that. And what are the other values that got to be so selected from the little kilowatt button with the down arrow? I don't know what that one is. And how many CTs in use and locations are some values from the components instead of CT? Gail. CTs in use. Well, I'm not certain how to answer that. We have 3 shunts, but I'm certain that's not what you're talking about. With the FNDC, we can monitor up to 3 shunts and all of its DC values into the inverter. But as far as CTs, each device is going to have its own current sensing information, and that's why you can, you know, look at the charge controller, says I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and then we tally them all up. And here's another question. Sorry, Gail, I don't know if I answered that very well. I run my system as mini grid, but would like to sell to the grid once the charge parameters have been met. I also want the system grid back to mini grid mode once the PV diffraction drops. You know, that would be just exactly what you would be doing when you go to the modes. You could go into the mode and say, I want to be in mini grid from, and I did this on my system for a while at night. I tried several different things actually, and 2 different things. One, I went to mini grid after the sun went down, and then I just simply used my batteries all night long, and in the morning when the sun came up, I said, you know, let's start grid tie selling. So it would go through, you know, I ran my batteries down, not much because I don't have very many loads, very much in loads, but that would be one way. You could choose mini grid for X amount of time, go back to solar when, you know, when the solar starts happening. You could also, instead of using mini grid, you could just simply say drop. You could use the AC drop command under the grid use. I want to sell back during these hours, and during these non-sell hours, I want to reject the grid and just run in off-grid mode. The grid is still there. You'll see the ACN light blink, but we won't use it. And just so you know, I was doing that too. And I'm just experimenting with these things at my house, just trying to see which one works and how they work and the reaction to my system. And I'm having a blast. But on that, what I did is I said I want to sell, so I connected to the grid from basically 6 in the morning until 6 at night, something like that. I forget the exact times. I used the grid drop command, where I just said, you know, go off grid using the grid use timers. And one night, I had just come back from Africa. I got a whole bunch of raw coffee beans, and before I went to bed, I roasted my beans in a popcorn popper out on my front step. Well, I went to bed and I left that 1,000 or 900 watt coffee roaster on all night. I'm lucky it didn't burn up the beans and cause a fire, but in the morning I opened the door and I heard that going, and I looked and I had ran my batteries down to low battery cutout because I left this load on. I said do not use the grid, and I left this load on, and in the morning I looked, my mate's showing a red error light, and I look, it says low battery. And what it happens is, this is a failsafe in the inverter. I did something stupid. I said, do not use the grid, and then I drove my batteries down to low battery cutoff, and the inverter saved me. What it said, Lonus, I realize you're an idiot. So what I'm going to do is when I hit low battery cutout, if the grid is available, I will use it. So that is a safeguard built into the system. If the grid is available and you hit this low battery cutout, because I told it to, then I'm going to use the grid anyway. So that's kind of a nice little safety feature that I learned about by doing something fairly silly. This was only supposed to be an hour long, and I don't know how many people. Okay, I see some people have left. Are the voltage values shown in optics RE actual or temp compensated? The charging values, the float value, and the absorbed value are the temp compensated voltages. I mean, when the inverter says I need to charge up and it's 20 below zero, I am going to add this much to it. So I think your question, though, is what's shown in optics, is that the temp compensated voltage or the actual or what the target voltage is? Tell you the truth, I really don't know, but I know if you go into the inverter, you can see those two values. I'm pretty certain that somewhere in the inverter status page, you can see the battery actual and the temp compensated. I don't know what's shown up on the optics screen when you're looking at it, when you hover over the battery and it says I'm at 52. I really don't know the answer to that. I'll try to find out. That's a good question. Is there a minimum requirement to connect the optics Mate 3 to the internet? I'm in an off-grid application. Minimum requirement. Basically, I'm assuming that you're talking about internet speed on this. And sorry, I just looked at the next question. Kendall, shame on you. Is there a minimum requirement to connect the optic Mate 3 to the internet in an off-grid application? Basically, if you've got the internet and it's a sufficient speed, you should be able to do it. On-grid or off-grid, doesn't matter. You know, as far as the, I don't know about the internet speed. Sorry, I'm just not up on that. And there's a question from Kendall Schmidt, who formerly was a friend of mine that worked here, at least still a friend. He says, will you come over and set up my system? I don't know. This guy has got it. He's got it going on. He's got a great garden. He knows how to pick mushrooms that are just killer. Don't the batteries have to go through a full charge, then a rest period before connecting the Mate 3 for more accurate SOC? Chris, you know, again, and I'm not certain, but I don't doubt that. You know, if you're going to, if on that guy's question, he says, how come my SOC doesn't match? You're right. I think I would want to go through a complete charge, let them rest, maybe even doing another one. Make sure that are 100%, and then start thinking about the accuracy of the SOC. There's probably ins and outs to that. While I deal with batteries a lot, I am not the battery genius. Matter of fact, one of the things I've always said is the best way to start a fight is get 5 or 6 battery experts in one room and then ask one question. So that's and I'll say the question again. Don't batteries have to go through a full charge, then a rest period before connecting the Mate 3 for more accurate SOC? I would say that's true, and perhaps where this comes from, here's the issue that can happen. I'm commissioning a system. I don't know if the batteries are completely full. They may be less than full. So what happens, I hook it up. When you plug in the FNDC, it powers up and says, oh, I'm going to assume those batteries are 100%. And what happens if they're not? Well, now you're completely out of sync starting the system out. And it's going to take a while before they sync up. So the good idea is to get a full charge completely into your batteries and then start worrying about the SOC. You know, get a full charge, and then either plug in the FNC after a complete full cycle, or just go through a full charge cycle, and the FNC will eventually go up to 100%. And if your batteries are still taking a lot of current, well, the FNDC could say, I'm at 100% because you just plugged me in, but you see a lot of current going into your batteries. Well, the batteries are kings. So, you know, if you can, check the specific gravity. If you can't, charge them up until they are accepting so little current that they have to be full. New battery, talk to your battery manufacturer, ask them, hey, at what current draw, if I'm presenting this thing with a full absorbed value, at what current draw into my batteries can I say that they're at 100%? And usually they're going to give you a 1 to 2 to 3% of the full battery capacity. If I've got a 500 amp hour battery and I'm accepting as little as 5 amps into them, basically 1%, well, they're probably full, you know. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. Christelle, that is actually when it first started for me. I'm sorry, there's Christelle. Okay, yeah, and he's just commenting about the midnight a joke here. I won't go into the joke. Good one, Chris. On graph, Chris, if he pays me enough, I will go set up Kindle's system. Herman, all right. So Kindle, Herman Goldman from Hawaii is willing to come over and set up your system. I think he's crazy. It's raining and cold here, and Hawaii is not rainy and cold. Okay, and Rick has a question here. Our system stays at 100% all day, but then at night when the percent SOC changes is when the SOC changes. We're fully off grid and use our batteries down at night. We have a 9.9 kilowatt system and only use less than 1 kilowatt hour most day. Yeah, that sounds reasonable, I believe. I mean, if you've got a nice solar system, it's going to charge the batteries up to 100%. And then what happens is the batteries start taking little current, but we'll still jump up and honor the loads. And I've seen this at my system where you have solar up and I don't have the grid. The solar is hardly producing anything because the batteries are full. They're not accepting any current. So the charge controller is controlling the charge. And I can hit it with a heavy load. And if the solar is there, it just jumps up and says, well, I'm maintaining the batteries, but I see this coming out of the batteries. So I'm going to add it back to it. And I've seen my system, you know, I have a microwave, just solar go from almost nothing up to almost 2K to supply the load. So if you're doing that, then yeah, that makes sense. Well, listen, I think that's basically the last of the questions. I don't know how many people are still here, but I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. We're about 15 minutes over, and I'm actually off work about 15 minutes ago. So I'm going to let you all go. Thank you very much. I love the questions, really interesting. I hope my answers were correct to the best of my knowledge, but it doesn't always mean I'm right, but I try. All right, thank you very much. Have a good day.